When we talk about why people overeat, especially all that, tempting junk food, we kind of think, oh, it's that pleasure hit, right? That dopamine rush from all the salt and fat and sugar.
Yeah, that's kind of, the intuitive idea.
Exactly, that it just keeps us hooked, and then, ultimately we gain weight and become obese.
Right, right.
But what if I told you there's this new research from UC Berkeley, and they're suggesting something different? They're suggesting that maybe it's not an increase in pleasure that drives obesity, but maybe a decrease.
The decrease.
Yeah. Huh, interesting.
So for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this idea. We have this one study. It looks mainly at animal models. But, it suggests this really unexpected mechanism.
Okay, well, let's jump in. What did these researchers actually find?
Okay, so they were looking at these mice, and they noticed that when these mice were on a high-fat diet for a long time, they had this reduction in a specific brain peptide called neurotensin.
Neurotensin. Okay.
Yeah. And remind me, what does neurotensin do in the brain, especially when it comes to food and enjoyment?
Yeah, so neurotensin, this is so interesting, it actually boosts the dopamine response in the brain. And we're talking about the areas that are linked to food reward.
Ah, okay.
So dopamine is like that happy signal, right? That your brain gets when you eat something yummy.
Right.
And neurotensin kind of acts like a booster for that signal.
It makes that pleasurable feeling stronger.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so these mice that were eating the high-fat diet, they had less of this neurotensin booster. So what happened to how much they enjoyed their food?
So that's just it. They had lower levels of neurotensin, so the dopamine response was lower.
Oh.
Which means that even when they ate these high-calorie foods, the pleasure they felt wasn't as intense. It was like their brains were getting less excited about the very thing that you think they'd be craving more of, right?
Right, yeah.
But it led to some interesting behaviors.
Like what?
So in their home cages, the mice that were on the high-fat diet, they consistently ate the high-fat chow.
Okay, as you would expect.
They gained weight, as you would expect. But then they were offered all these high-calorie treats. Things like, butter, peanut butter, jelly, chocolate.
Oh, wow.
And compared to the mice that had a normal diet, they showed less interest in these new, really tasty options.
Wow, that's so interesting. So they're still eating the high-fat food, but they're not getting that same, excitement over the new, really delicious treats.
Exactly.
Oh.
So the researchers thought, okay, well, this reduction in pleasure because of the lower neurotensin, it might be leading to kind of a habitual, joyless eating. Instead of actively looking for that pleasure from the food, they might just be eating because it's a routine or maybe some other need that isn't about enjoyment.
I see.
And the researchers are thinking this could actually make obesity worse.
Oh, wow. That's kind of a counterintuitive finding, isn't it? That the less pleasure you get, the more you eat.
Yeah. Professor Stefan Lammel, he's quoted in the study, he says that a natural inclination towards junk food isn't necessarily the problem, but losing that draw, not wanting it anymore, could actually worsen obesity.
Huh. So it's like their body's reward system gets kind of messed up in a way that encourages more eating but not more satisfaction.
Right, exactly.
And they actually looked deeper into the brain to see what was happening.
Yeah. They used optogenetics to study the brain circuits involved in reward. Have you heard of optogenetics?
I think so, vaguely.
It's really cool. So scientists can use light to precisely control the activity of specific brain cells.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what they found was that in the mice that had a normal diet, stimulating those reward pathways made them want the high-calorie food more.
Okay.
But in the obese mice, that same stimulation had a much weaker effect. They could see that the brain circuits that are responsible for pleasure, they just weren't firing as strongly in the obese mice when they got that rewarding food.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So the big question is, what's causing this weaker response?
Well, that's where the neurotensin comes back in.
Okay.
Yeah. So Professor Lammel, he calls neurotensin, quote, this missing link.
Interesting.
So their findings showed that the decrease in neurotensin in the obese mice, that was the main reason why their reward pathways weren't responding as strongly to the food.
Okay. So they found the problem. Less neurotensin, less pleasure.
Yeah.
But the most exciting part is that they tried to fix it, right?
Right.
They actually got the neurotensin levels back up in these mice.
Yes. So first, they just switched the mice back to a normal diet for 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
And that restored neurotensin levels back to normal.
Wow.
Yeah. And along with that, their dopamine function got better, and they started showing more interest in those high-calorie treats again.
Oh, so just a short period of, eating normally again.
Yeah.
And it had such a big impact on, their brains and what they wanted to eat. Oh. But that was just one way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So then the second way they did it was through genetic manipulation. They basically increased the amount of neurotensin in the obese mice. And these mice, not only did they start losing weight, but they also showed all these other good changes, like reduced anxiety, and they were moving around better.
Wow. Did it make them, just want to eat more of everything, though?
That's the thing. No, they showed more motivation for high-calorie foods when they were presented with them in the test. So it was like they were experiencing the pleasure again. But the amount they ate overall in their home cages, it actually decreased.
Mm.
Yeah. So Professor Lamel, he said that bringing back neurotensin seemed, quote, very, very critical for preventing the loss of desire.
Wow.
And he said that, it might not make them completely resistant to gaining weight, but it could be really important in helping them manage their eating and making it go back to a more normal pattern.
So this is really promising then for new treatments for obesity.
Yeah, I mean, if this lack of pleasure is really driving it, then maybe if they could target neurotensin pathways, that could open up all these new therapies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really, really good point. So, one thing the researchers talk about is directly giving someone neurotensin might not be the best way
Mm.
because it does other things in other parts of the brain.
Right.
So you might get side effects.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they use gene sequencing
Mm.
and they identified these specific molecules, I guess you could think of them like switches, that control neurotensin levels.
Okay.
And so maybe if they can develop a drug or something that can flip those switches in the right direction,
Right.
then that could, really help people that are, struggling with obesity without all those side effects.
Yeah, it would be a much more targeted approach.
Yeah.
But, we do have to remember that this was a study in mice.
Right.
And things don't always translate perfectly from mice to humans.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like the mechanisms might be similar, but human biology is much more complex.
Yeah, yeah.
But still, it gives us a reason to look into it more, right?
Absolutely.
And this study, they used a great example. They talked about, like, when you eat an amazing dessert in Paris,
Ooh, la la.
right, and you just get that dopamine rush. It's so pleasurable. And they saw that same thing in the mice with the normal diet when they were offered treats.
Okay, so they had that same dopamine rush. Yeah.
But it was missing in the high-fat diet mice.
Oh, interesting.
And Neda Gazit-Shimoni, one of the researchers, she said that the mice on that high-fat diet, they might just be eating out of habit or even boredom.
Wow. So they're eating all this food, but they're not enjoying it.
Yeah. And, I mean, this is different from treatments we have now, like GLP-1 agonists. Have you heard of those?
Vaguely.
So there's this drug, Ozempic, and it basically works by curbing your appetite. It increases your feelings of fullness.
I see, I see.
So it's like, it tells your body, okay, you're full, stop eating. But this research is saying, well, maybe we also need to address that part of the brain that says, this is enjoyable.
Right. Like one approach is about just stopping you from eating.
Mm.
And the other is about making sure that you're enjoying what you're eating.
Yeah, yeah. And the researchers, they're already thinking bigger than this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they want to see what neurotensin's role is in other conditions like diabetes and eating disorders. So, it makes you wonder, how are these reward systems, how are they acting or maybe not acting correctly in these different, health problems that people have?
Yeah, this tiny little peptide can be having this huge impact in all these different areas of our health. It's really, really interesting.
So listeners, for you, the big takeaway is that, when it comes to overeating, especially high-fat foods, it might not be that we love it too much. It might be that over time, our brain is actually becoming less sensitive to it, and we're losing that pleasure, and that might actually be what's contributing to us overeating and gaining weight.
Yeah, and maybe instead of focusing on restricting unhealthy foods or just stopping ourselves from eating, maybe the best way to manage our weight is to find a way to enjoy healthy foods again.
Yeah, food for thought, right.
Definitely.
And as these researchers continue to explore all this, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they find, because this could change how we think about a lot of different health problems.
Absolutely. It's a really important area of research.
Yeah.